As you may know, Bulgaria lost the Second Balkan War, and it's fair to say that they stood no chance, as they had to fight against all of their neighboring countries all at once, which resulted in Bulgaria to lose in a month later, and were stripped from all of these territories. Bulgaria winning this war would be tricky, but it would change quite a lot. For example, the First World War started not even a year later after the Second Balkan War, and all of these countries participated in the First World War at various times. With Bulgaria coming out on top of this conflict, it's fair to say that the sides would change, and the Bulgarians can try to remain out of this conflict. You can just take a look at this picture and see how these three countries who are allying and fighting with each other 3 different times, and how Bulgaria winning can change that. Let's see how this tiny change would alter the Great War and the future of the Balkan Peninsula. Before we discuss the Second Balkan War, we must discuss the creation of the universe. No, I'm joking, but understanding the First Balkan War is also important. This is because the Second Balkan War happened a month after the first one. There, all of these countries formed the Balkan Pact and teamed up against the Ottoman Empire and managed to defeat them. The Balkan countries were successful because Italy had just defeated the Ottomans, where the Italians took Libya and the Deccanese Islands from them. This is why the Balkan countries managed to be victorious. The Ottoman Empire was simply taken advantage of and their weakness was exploited. There was a verbal agreement that Bulgaria can keep Skopje and Thessaloniki if they reach them first. The Bulgarian Tsar Ferdinand I interpreted this as Serbia and Greece promising Bulgaria these territories, which was a big misunderstanding. When the peace treaties were signed, Bulgaria never reached Skopje nor Thessaloniki, so they were annexed into Serbia and Greece respectively. Tsar Ferdinand I requested that these territories are handed over to Bulgaria, but Serbia and Greece allied with each other and stood strong against Bulgaria. This resulted in Bulgaria to invade both countries a month later. Now, this is the simple version of the story, and there are many disagreements on that. If you ask the Bulgarians, which is my home nationality, they will say that they were owed these territories and that Serbia and Greece betrayed Bulgaria. And if you ask the other side, they will tell you that no such agreement was signed. I myself, unfortunately, am from Bulgaria, and don't worry, I'm not a Bulgarian nationalist. Even I dislike Bulgaria. Since there are conflicting opinions, I need to step up and choose one. I decided to choose the verbal agreement that Bulgaria can keep Skopje and Thessaloniki only if they reach them first. This in turn means that the territories that you occupy in the Ottoman Empire you get to keep. This is the alternate agreement between the Balkan Pact, which this time would be signed. This means that if Bulgaria simply manages to reach Skopje and Thessaloniki first, they'll keep them. Now, this is somewhat unrealistic. Bulgaria did have a chance, but it was quite unlikely. For the sake of this video, let's not give Bulgaria magical powers and say that the same outcome is again reached. Bulgaria wanted to capture most of Macedonia province, but it was instead taken by Serbia and Greece. This would leave us with the same borders that we had after the First Balkan War. Now, let me quickly mention that when Bulgaria was the Second Balkan War, they got a crisis now called the First National Disaster. The second one came after Bulgaria was the Great War 5 years after that. While calling it a national disaster sounds hard, I would argue that it wasn't that bad, or at least not worse than the Great War. Let me explain. I have all of these coins, which are 2 leva coins from different years. The last one is from 1912, when Bulgaria was quite small. Here is the 1913 coin, and you can see that it's exactly identical. It has the same amount of silver as the previous coins, just the year is different. Now look at the 2 leva coin after the Great War. This coin is from 1923, and instead of silver, it's just made with aluminum. This coin is from 1925. This time it's a more solid metal, but still it had no silver. There was a lot of inflation in Bulgaria after the Great War, and it can be seen in their coins. This 100 leva coin from 1930 has almost the exact same amount of silver as the 2 leva coin from 1913. This means that the currency just became 50 times weaker as a result of Bulgaria losing the Great War. And this event wasn't seen in any way in the Second Balkan War. There, Bulgaria just lost a bit of territory, and it was that. They didn't have to pay any war reparations and restrict their armies, unlike the Great War. Going to the alternate history part, historically, Bulgaria invaded Serbia and Greece as they wanted to take these territories by force. This resulted in Romania to jump in on the opportunity and steal land after the war, with the Ottoman Empire doing the same. Bulgaria was defeated in just a month of fighting, and their capital city of Sofia became the first capital in the world to be bombed by airplanes. Now let me remind you that dealing with the Balkans is especially tricky. We are also very close to the Serbian assassination of Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, so any minor change I make can do a lot to change the world. Since Bulgaria signed an agreement that allowed them to take the lands they had conquered, their claims over Skopje and Thessaloniki would be weaker. They also cannot say that Serbia and Greece betrayed them. This is why I don't think the Second Balkan War would start immediately after the first one, but a bit later. In the meantime, Bulgaria would sponsor revolutions in Macedonia, which would turn violent. While it would be funny for the Serbian king Peter I to visit Macedonia for propaganda reasons, and for him to get assassinated there, I'll not go for this scenario. Instead, Serbia and Greece start fighting the insurgency, which would be supported by Bulgaria. There was a big Macedonian revolution organization present, which initially aimed to rebel against the Ottoman Empire and join Bulgaria. This time they will rebel against Serbia and Greece and want to join Bulgaria. In the meantime, Bulgaria want to improve relations with Russia, Romania and the Ottoman Empire. The Second Balkan War would start a couple of months after it did historically, around the end of 1913, rather than during the middle of the same year. Bulgaria managed to mobilize twice as many soldiers as Greece and Serbia combined, which trend was even present in the First Balkan War. This means that if it was a fair fight, Bulgaria would for sure win against Serbia and Greece. But is it going to be a fair fight? Well, I think that with Bulgaria giving up some land, it would become possible. When the war starts, Romania and the Ottoman Empire would express their interest in joining, but Russia would keep them in check. The Russians going to war to defend Bulgaria instead of Serbia is a stretch, but they can mediate the conflict. Bulgaria would lose southern Dobruja to Romania in order to secure their neutrality, but nothing would be given to the Ottoman Empire. This is because Russia wanted to have a weaker Ottoman state, which was their rival at the time. The other alternative is for the Ottomans that they simply get Crete after the war, as Bulgaria would give it to them, in case the Ottomans remained neutral. As an alternative, the Bulgarians can give up the city of Odrin, also called Edirne, to the Ottoman Empire, but keep the rest of their gains. This is because Edirne was the second capital of the Ottoman Empire from 1969 to 1453, so it's got a historical significance for the Ottomans. Bulgaria would give up a bit of land, but secure neutrality. Now, if you say that this is unrealistic, well, maybe, but how else would I make Bulgaria win this war? I think that Ferdinand I would prefer to lose these territories and gain Macedonia, and most importantly, to win the war. Because if the Romanians and the Ottomans join, Bulgaria will lose these lands either way, so they can as well gain Macedonia, if these lands were to be lost anyways. Speaking of Macedonia, historically, when the war started, Bulgaria had an easy time pushing into Macedonia, capturing a lot of the Serbian-occupied region of Macedonia. With the Macedonian revolutionary organization present and causing problems, the Bulgarians can capture even more. Historically, 5 days into the war, Bulgaria controlled most of Macedonia and had almost cut Serbia off from Greece. This time, the Bulgarians would reach the Albanian border. It's possible that Albania also joins the conflict against Serbia and Greece, so they can form Greater Albania, which would include Western Macedonia and Kosovo, which Bulgaria would promise to the Albanian kingdom. For the sake of this video and the success of Bulgaria in the Second Balkan War, I would say that Albania joins this conflict. Now, if you're looking at this and you're thinking that this is a bit unrealistic, I'll agree with you. After all, I'm trying to make Bulgaria win this conflict in these conditions, and I don't think that there was any realistic possibility. I'm just doing my best. Now, let me mention that Albania would at this point be a couple of months out as a country. Them joining wouldn't contribute a lot. Now, this scenario is entirely built on the assumption that Romania and the Ottoman Empire wouldn't join. This is not a good way to go about it, but considering these front lines, I would say that Bulgaria would win easily. The Bulgarians would push the Greeks out of the frontlands, and the Greek soldiers would hold their line in the mountains, but the Bulgarians wouldn't bleed going the distance to Athens. They will simply shift their focus on Serbia and maybe capitulate the country. This is why I think that Bulgaria would annex Serbia and form Yugoslavia, which would mean that there is no Great War and we would all live a happy and prosperous life, right? Well, not really. Let me go back to the Serbo-Bulgarian War of 1885, where Bulgaria united with the Ottoman puppet state of Eastern Rumelia. All the great powers except Great Britain opposed this, but nobody was willing to go to war for it. Austro-Hungary made Serbia attack Bulgaria, to which the Serbians agreed. Bulgaria put a bit of a miracle and had good commanding, so they defended themselves and started entering Serbian territory. When this happened, Austro-Hungary panicked and told Bulgaria to stop or they would join Serbia's side. The Bulgarians seized their advance and the war ended with a white peace. I mention this because I don't know how Austro-Hungary would react this time, with Bulgaria going again into mainland Serbian territories. Maybe Austro-Hungary intervenes just to save Serbia, which the Austrians wanted to puppet themselves. Austria-Hungary did have some unequal treaties put on Serbia, forcing the Serbians to purchase certain goods from them. You can Google Pig Wars 1906-1908 and open Wikipedia to learn more. It even says in the first sentence that in the 20th century, Serbia was economically a satellite of the Habsburgs. This is why I don't think that Austria-Hungary would respond so kindly to Bulgarian insurrection into Serbia. This is another layer on top that Bulgaria really couldn't win this war. It's really absurd. Considering Austria-Hungary's economic interest in Serbia, they would give Bulgaria two proposals while the war is ongoing. Either Bulgaria and Albania don't take any land from Serbia, but they can expand into Greece instead, which would satisfy Austria-Hungary. Or the other option is that the same economic customs that were put on Serbia would be transferred to Bulgaria, which would enrich Austria-Hungary further. The Bulgarians are likely to refuse both options, especially if they have the backing of other great powers. Them craving to the Austrian demands not to take Serbia and Macedonia is close to impossible, and this would for sure result in the public to want Ferdinand I to resign and for his son to replace him, and then to invade Macedonia again. The other option would just make Bulgaria an Austrian client state, so neither option was plausible. It is there when I want to split the scenario into two parts, one where Bulgaria takes the deal and another where they resist. The one where they resist is the most unlikely, but it would allow for a really cool alternate history. This is because Austria-Hungary would invade Bulgaria, resulting in Russia to defend Bulgaria, Germany to declare war on Russia, who would call France into the conflict. This means that we would have Central Powers Serbia and Entente Bulgaria, which would for sure mean no Yugoslavia after the war has ended. But now, let's explore the first scenario where Bulgaria agrees with Austrian demands and takes their claimed territory from Greece instead. Ferdinand I would most likely abdicate and his son, Boris III, would take over, but he would be only 19 to 20 years old. Since the year is early 1914, in the summer, Franz Ferdinand would probably get again assassinated in Sarajevo, which would activate the chain of alliances and the Great War would start exactly the same way as it did in our timeline. This time, Austria-Hungary invades sooner and doesn't give the Serbians a month to respond due to their ultimatum. This would only benefit the Central Powers in the earlier war. Another thing that I would predict would happen is that the Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph I would abdicate in favor of Charles I. This is because the people would be mad that Austria-Hungary defended Serbia a couple of months ago, and now they would be at war with them. Charles I is famous for wanting to reform the Austrian Empire, but considering that he would be at war, such reforms would be delayed. It's more likely that Charles I would listen to Germany's advice, which would mean more competent Austria-Hungary. For example, they wouldn't lose Galicia and would capitulate Serbia quicker. Bulgaria would also join in the Serbian invasion. As I said, the Bulgarian people would demand war, so Boris III had to comply. But this would be very much out of character for him. I would say that Ferdinand I had great success in mobilizing Bulgaria for a war, and I don't think that Boris III would do such a good job. Overall, we would have a stronger Austria-Hungary, but a weaker Bulgaria. The Ottoman Empire would for sure join the Central Powers, for the same reasons as they did historically. Greece would also be looking to join the Entente. This time, there wouldn't be such a divide between the king and the prime minister, who favored two opposing sides. Everyone in Greece would demand Bulgarian and Ottoman lands. Greece would join and would fall back to more defensible positions. This I think would result in Greece to hold their own and they would for sure never fall. Romania's case is an interesting one if they would join or not, as they only joined when Russia had a successful offensive into Austria-Hungary. Now, with more competent Austrian emperor, this wouldn't happen, so Romania's entry into the Entente might never come. Other than that, we have the same conditions for an Entente victory, despite the Central Powers putting a bit more of a fight. The peace treaty I wouldn't cover too much, as I have another scenario to cover regarding Bulgaria starting the Great War, instead of Serbia. Overall, this scenario doesn't do too much to change the world, but it's the most realistic. Bulgaria would still join the Axis in the Second World War and most likely lose their access to the Aegean Sea, resulting in their modern-day borders. But what about if Bulgaria resisted Austria-Hungary and called their bluff? Well, I think that the Austrian people had protective attitude towards the Serbians, and they would intervene to save Serbia from Bulgaria. Russia is in a bad place, as they also favored Serbia, but their justification to enter the Great War was to protect the Slavic people from Austrian aggression. Russia can still use the same justification, but they would have to twist it around, as they would now mean to liberate Galicia, Bohemia and Slovakia from Austria's grip. Russia defending Bulgaria is not the most realistic outcome, I'll admit, but if they do, it would allow for some cool scenarios, so let's take a look at one. I already gave you a somewhat realistic scenario, so let's take a look at this one. In this war, the same chain of alliances would be called, and Europe would look like this: Central Power Serbia and Entente Bulgaria. But nobody could have predicted that. Greece would also have to join the Central Powers, unless they admit defeat and sign a peace treaty, but this is unlikely. Anyways, Bulgaria would have to fall back to more defensible positions and concede land. Albania would be quick to surrender as they didn't want to take part in this massive war. Most likely, they would lose minor territories. Italy is more likely to join the Central Powers, and if this were to happen, it would seal the deal for the faction to be victorious. This is because Italy can get all of Albania as compensation for them not getting their reclaimed lands in Austro-Hungary. While this would be really cool to happen, I don't think that the Italians will go down this path, unless Austria does some minor concessions and still gives the Italians Albania. Whoever size the Kingdom of Italy ends up joining would be victorious, and it's impossible to predict if Austria-Hungary would give these lands in order to secure an ally. With Bulgaria falling back to more defensible positions and the Germans doing the Schlieffen plan and getting close to Paris, it's possible that the Italians can see the Central Powers as the victorious side. I would assume that Italy would take some time to decide and finally end up joining the Entente, as to them, Austrian lands were more valuable than the Albanian ones. Again, it's anyone's guess and I would love to hear your opinion in the comments. I think that the Entente would come out on top in this conflict. In the peace treaty, I'll cover only the Balkans, as realistically only there we would have some changes. Bulgaria would simply take their claimed lands, with Greece suffering an ultranationalist revolution that would depose the king, and Serbia being greatly reduced in size. It's unlikely that France and Britain would allow for Serbia to form Yugoslavia, considering that Serbia was on the losing side of the war, so an independent Croatian and Slovenian state is possible. Hungary might also keep Vojvodina, but with the Hungarian Soviet Republic's rise, we don't know if this would last. This is quite a weird scenario, and the Second World War would be more interesting, as Greece and Serbia would for sure join the Axis voluntarily, and Bulgaria would be on the chopping block. If you don't know about the Hungarian Soviet Republic I just mentioned, they briefly existed after the Great War. So what if they remained in charge and allied with the Soviet Union? How would that change the Second World War? Check this video to find out, and I hope you have a beautiful day.